ask you about your chapbook, which was recently published
Hmm.
by OClock Press,
Hmm.
The Main Cause of the Exodus. Can
Hmm.
you just tell me a little bit about that project?
Um, yeah, it's a weird thing. It actually started as my graduate students, if they ever see this, will be happy to know it started as an assignment that I gave to my graduate students. And it was like a long assignment where they had to redo a bunch of research, and find these primary texts. And I think what they had to research was really some way in which the physical body works. So, if you think about like, what happens to your body when you sneeze, what happens to your body when you're bleeding from your like seven orifices at the same time, like whatever it is, like what does the body actually do? Like it could be, it could also be like a psychological thing, but they had to pick that. And then they had to kind of read all of that information and then use that information as a kind of excerpted text in whatever way that they wanted to do it. So there was a kind of broad, kind of category of instruction left up to them to interpret. And often often I do the exercises that I give my graduate students as kind of prompts to myself, especially if it's a long, really detailed one like that. And that book emerged out of that. One of the so I started researching. For some reason, I stumbled upon this newspaper story of that was like a kind of like early 20th century, I think. Um, and it was about these little colored orphans in this orphanage in Brooklyn. And I think I know the building or where the building was. And I was just kind of reading the story, and it was just so bizarre. And it kept talking about the little colored, or it was like this, like it was in the New York Times, and it was like a kind of, just like kind of a puff piece about how happy these orphans are in this orphanage and how they would sing all the time. And so I was like, okay, so this will be like a primary text. And then I just kind of, the research that was left out was like, what happens to the body when you sing? And then it
Mm.
just is broadened to this book length project that I kept working on. I think it started as 8 pages or something. And so then it just became really about like scientific racism. And it went in that direction. And then it became about, then it simultaneously, for some reason, there was an offshoot where it becomes about both scientific racism and like the diagnosing people as as nymphomaniacs.
Mm.
So, of the same kind of, you know, crazy scientific moment that is not really a science, neither one of those things. So,
This book was published in a edition of just 100. Was there something appealing to you about that kind of limited?
yeah, I love chapbooks. I love them. I like their kind of like, that they're beautiful. They kind of have this kind of precious quality to them. Once they're out, they're out, they're done. A section, a longer version of that chapbook appears actually in the new collection of poems that's going to be published by Nightboat. So there is a part of it, or a longer part of it, that will appear. But I love that it becomes a kind of collector's item in a way. Like if you have it, you have it, and if you don't, you don't. You can never ever. It's never going to be available again.
Mhm.
Um, it's more like an art object, I think, for me, than like this mass produced thing.
But when I heard a lot of people describe your book, including Fanny Howe in the introduction, your book Discipline, she used the word disgust a lot, about the
Hmm.
disgust of other people. And I
Hmm.
was just wondering what you thought about that as a poetry of revulsion or of a poetry of disgust.
That's really interesting. I mean, for me, the book speaks very quietly. So, when I read something like that, it seems appropriate in a way, but at the same time, it's surprising to me, right? So, is it, I think that as far as discipline is concerned, it is um, kind of, kind of multi-val, it's multi kind of narrative. It has a kind of multi-narrativity to it. If disgust is one part of it, um, it's I think a disgust that is not something that's cast necessarily, as much as it's kind of simultaneously perhaps like a slur and an embrace, right? So there's a way in which I think that there's no moment in the book for me as a writer that is um, kind of singular in that way when it comes to something like perhaps disgust is one kind of motivating factor. Perhaps it's, poetics of disgust is at work here. It, um, there's a kind of multiplicity and a kind of owning of that disgust. It's kind of like, any kind of, it's kind of like the sexual implications of the book, which are, both about kind of agency and victimization at the same time. So I think of this if that disgust factor is in the book, that it's like that, right? It's like two sides of the same coin.
Are there
Mm.
still things in discipline that feel fresh to you or that feel like you're still trying to work out?
There are parts of that book that I never read. I just read. I don't know why. I'm kind of sick of reading from it because I just read from the same. I'm really really drawn to these like certain moments as far as the impulse to have a conversation with an audience. There are parts that I just, and so I think that if I were to look at those parts of the book, they're kind of like toward the middle end. There may be something there that I still would like to attend to, but the fact is that I don't know because I never look at those poems. Um, the book that I'm working on now, so like that's like on the kind of micro level. But the book that I'm working on now, which is called "Life in a Box is a Pretty Life," is a kind of continuation of the concerns that are raised in discipline, um, the world that was created in discipline um, is kind of reinvestigated in this new book. So there's a way in which those two things are in conversation, and it feels like to me, discipline kind of like gave birth to
Mm.
this next project.
How would you describe or characterize those concerns?
How would I describe what?
The concerns that are guiding this new book.
I would say so in discipline there it's the kind of multi-narrativity is there's one about the father, there's like kind of like I think the most concrete story in the book is this story of the father dying of cancer in relation to the daughter who's a kind of caretaker but also witnessing this process and so there are some flashbacky moments too, or harkening back to before the father was dying of cancer, and then there are these little other parts that kind of shoot off from that, which is just about kind of family life. So that's I think the most concrete concern. And the other concerns really have to do one, there is a kind of sadomasochism for me in the book that has to do with this kind of like I said before, this way in which there are figures in the book that, you know, have both agency and no agency kind of at the same time or next to each other or something. There's a kind of question as to, what victimization is in the book. Um, the notion of discipline has to do with that. So that would be maybe the third concern, which is, how do you make a choice? What does it mean to make a choice? Is it possible for any of us to make choices? Actually, we always feel like we're making choices, but are we actually making choices, or is there some other voice in our head? Is there a kind of discursive impetus that kind of creates the thing that we think we want and need and want to go after? Um, and I call that discipline, and very loosely a very loose interpretation of Foucault. Um, and then there's the last thing that I think the book deals with is, it's a kind of dystopia. There's a kind of dystopia in the book where, the world is really, kind of, eh, you know, kind of weighing down on each of the figures that appear in the book in a way that feels, oppressive in some way.
Mm.
So I would say, yeah, those are like the concerns. I think. Who knows?